My name is John Kerry, and I used to be the next president of the United States. What a really special, unbelievably meaningful gathering, really a sort of reunion of the 1960s, I think. And looking around at the audience, you are apparently an audience that proves that marijuana is a good preservative. I want to make it clear, really, I do want to make this clear. Not everyone in our generation tried or experimented with drugs, but now we do. Flomax, Lipitor, Eliquis, Viagra, you name it, we're all in. So, my friends, 16 years ago, it's hard to believe it was that long, after Mary passed and we gathered for that celebratory revival of her memorial service at the Riverside Church, I observed at that time that the audience looked like a class reunion of the Nixon enemies list. I want you just to think back to those times. Rights were being violated, laws were being broken, a president was unhinged. You know what we call that now? The good old days. But we'll say something about that. But I think what's certain, and I think all of us know this incredible turnout on behalf of our brother Peter. What is certain is that if Peter Yarrow was here today, he would grab his guitar and he would sing about the kind of America that he knew we could still build together. And Peter was wonderfully, magically true to that idealistic vision that every day of his 86 years on this planet, he would remain the unreconstructed idealist. I was in my second year at college when I saw Peter, Paul, and Mary for the very first time, the winter of 1964 in New Haven, Yale University. And they came bounding in with their energy and took over Woolsey Hall. In the shadows of the bombings of Birmingham, the nuclear arms race, the assassination of Medgar Evers, the mutilation of Emmett Till, and of course the murder of a president who had inspired our generation. Little did we know then that the years to follow would bring more of the same wrenching drama and trauma for our country, that the tragedy of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy cut down in front of our eyes live on television, and the war in Vietnam gone horribly off course, and the riots in our cities. And through it all, into that deep void, came something to help us process our pain, to reinvigorate our idealism: folk music. Even the names became not just legendary, but they were personal to us. Woody, Pete, Bob, Joan, Joni, John, Tom, Linda, Emmylou. That's all you had to say, and everybody knew who you were talking about and what they would sing and how they had sung. And indeed, obviously, our fellow travelers, Peter, Paul, and Mary. They wrote, in many ways, I've thought about this often, about the tumult of 1968 and the calming, incredibly important impact music had on our lives. In many ways, Peter, Paul, and Mary as much as any group, as much as any singers, captured and wrote the soundtrack of our movement, of the ballad, if you will, of our mission. And when they brought folk music from the coffee houses to the Billboard 40, top 40, they didn't just change the direction of American music, they changed the direction of America itself. They rallied Americans against war, not just a war, against war, against social inequality, against bigotry, not only with their music, but with their activism. And how dearly today in this nation we need to remember that, grab onto it, and reproduce it. Bob Dylan said that a song is like a dream, and Peter believed that too, and so did Noel and Mary. And Peter worked to make the songs that he wrote, his dreams, a reality. He sang, he wrote, and he marched for peace, for justice, for workers, against gun violence, homelessness, and nuclear proliferation, for clean air and clean water, and yes, even clean energy. No less an icon than Coretta Scott King herself described Peter, Paul, and Mary are not only three of the greatest folk artists ever, but also three of the performing arts' most outstanding champions of social peace and justice. And wherever voices had to be raised for justice, and they did, and they still do, Peter's efforts, Peter's voice was pitch perfect. From Dr. King's March on Washington to the moratorium to end the war in Vietnam, and at literally hundreds and hundreds, perhaps even thousands, who can count them. You've heard tonight from people about how Peter would show up and Peter would be there. Peter sang at a wedding, and all over the country people were grateful for that voice. Literally hundreds of rallies and benefits over 5 decades, and they all followed, from Selma to Salinas to South Africa, from Jackson to Jerusalem. His voice and the voice of Peter, Paul, and Mary and others who led the protest were everywhere in our lives. It was, if I had a hammer at college, blowing in the wind as the war in Vietnam escalated, leaving on a jet plane as I left to join that war, and Puff the Magic Dragon as I patrolled the Mekong River. And obviously that requires a little explanation. But, I first met Peter in person in 1971, 2 days after I had testified to the United States Senate about the war and led 5,000 veterans to sleep on the mall in protest to the war. And a million people had gathered at a rally in front of the Capitol to stand united with the moratorium to end the war. Now, the congratulatory kiss and hug from Mary may have made the biggest impression on a 27-year-old just out of the Navy guy. But it was my budding friendship with Peter that would forever link me to a movable feast. I knew I wasn't going to get through this, folks. Friends, and we had an unbelievable group of friends for a lifetime. That friendship spanned camping trips on the Cape with our families, gathered around fireplaces and campfires and bonfires where we reveled in Peter's love of improv and our family tradition that everyone had to recite or act out or say something to the entire table. And yes, it is in that cocoon that Peter and I even competed to prove who had a better impression of Saturday Night Live, Italian chain-smoking priest in tinted glasses, Father Guido Sarducci. And I will not subject you to my version, but I will confess that Peter, with his mustache and his long hair, he had a big leg up on the competition. So Peter just naturally brought fun and laughter to those gatherings. And you look at the picture, that impish grin. And he brought us together through miles and the years and reminded us of all the things that we dreamed of at 18, 19, 20, and that they were all still worth fighting for and still possible if we stay true to the cause. He was a part of every one of my campaigns. In 1972, and Noel, and Mary. In 1972, after an election night, when Richard Nixon refused to go to bed until he confirmed the news that I had lost my race, it was a tough time. All of our idealism had seemingly ended in a crushing defeat, and something else, a crushing debt. Tens of thousands of dollars, several hundreds of thousands of dollars, owed by a 30-year-old losing candidate in the wake of the Nixon landslide. And I had no easy and clear way to pay that off. That's when you separate the sunshine patriots from the winter soldiers. Peter Yarrow got the band back together, literally, and along with Noel and Mary, they rode to the rescue and packed a concert hall for a sold-out concert to pay off my campaign debt. He even pulled in comedic brilliance from Robin Williams and Chevy Chase, even when it meant that they snuck behind him and Mary and Noel singing during the renditions of Puff the Magic Dragon while they puffed away on imaginary joints. I'm not sure that Peter knew why the crowd suddenly convulsed in laughter. And then came the presidential race. Peter supported Gene McCarthy for president in 1968, George McGovern in 1972, and me in 2004. But none of us blamed him. He was just genuinely, unfailingly loyal. And in 2003, during the primaries, I was trailing in the polls, and the folks in Iowa weren't necessarily giving us the greatest chance to win. But we believed in ourselves, and Peter believed in us. And we kept on keeping on, we carried on. And I remember Peter came to Iowa for the months leading into the Iowa caucuses. He was a Pied Piper. He just showed up with his guitar, literally, and offered to pack any living room, any farmhouse, any barn, any church meeting, or any VFW hall. And he did. And what a gift it was that Peter Yarrow became my opening act. It was a tough act to follow, too, folks. He spent weeks on this campaign bus we had. We had a lounge in the back with a big round table. We called it the Champagne Lounge. There was no champagne. But he spent weeks there it was a loud, rolling petri dish of stale sandwiches and cold coffee. And one night in January, late on the road, rolling down the dark highways set against these frozen, barren fields, and I'd seen, the old saying of, if it's July, the corn is knee-high. Well, we saw that. Now we were seeing the winter. And a few weeks before the caucuses, and Peter would come back into the far reaches of this bus and sit with a few of the press people who were traveling with us. And I remember he serenaded them with the favorites, but he sang my favorite, and you've already heard it a couple of times, which is Sweet Survivor. And he, gave all of us a huge lump in our throats. And I hung on the refrain's last line, "For everything that matters, carry on." We did, and so did Peter. We won those caucuses, and after my victory speech, I had a missed call and a voicemail from Peter saying, "Where do I go next?" So that's friendship. We went to New Hampshire, we won New Hampshire. In fact, we won every primary except for South Carolina. And you can't measure, particularly today, there's something that's happened, obviously, and we all understand what a dangerous moment this is for everything. But at that time, Peter was the most extraordinary example of citizenship. One of the most important words in the English language, citizen, goes back to the founding of democracy. And I will just add, perhaps inappropriately, I hope you won't get mad at me, but I have never seen such arrogance as we saw the other day in Pam Bondi, not responding to anything, ever. And that's, you know. So when I think of Peter, and I do frequently, because few people, Peter was a great teacher. You saw him teaching in some of those scenes a moment ago. And when I think of him, the lyrics of all the songs he sang really do come true. They're real. They weren't just entertainment. They were a philosophy. They were a way of thinking about life and how you organize yourselves and what is worth caring about and what we should fight for. And Peter would say today more than ever before, we, all of us, have a responsibility to fight back. So let's think about him every day. Let's remember that our mission is don't give up the dream and don't let it end. So it can come again. Carry on, carry on, carry on. And Peter, this much we can promise. We will carry on, and God bless you for the ways in which you always cared and never gave up the fight.